Yosemite, Yellowstone, Denali, Joshua Tree, these are just a few of the national parks that exist. Now imagine if you were riding your bike in the meadow in Yosemite National Park and you saw an oil well blocking your view of the deer eating at sunset. Or if you were hiking in Florida at Big Cypress National Preserve and saw heavy machinery being brought in to dig up the land. According to the National Parks Conservation Association, on March 28, 2017, President Trump issued an executive order requiring federal agencies to review or assign a number of critical policies that protect our national parks from the adverse impacts of oil and gas development, including the National Park Service 9B rules. Opening the national parks for oil drilling will significantly degrade the land and the quality of the national parks. Today I'll be discussing what the National Park Service 9B rules are, how opening the national parks for oil drilling will result in degradation of the land, and how oil drilling will lead to a loss of biodiversity in the national parks. First, let's discuss what the National Park Service 9B rules are. In 2016, the National Park Service made revisions to the 9B rules. The changes are as follows. According to the National Park Service, the 9B rule revision included removing exemptions that allowed wells to operate without Park Service approval, lifting the bonding cap, meaning oil and gas operations are typically required to put up money before they begin drilling, to ensure that the government has money and funds available to clean up the oil spills if the company decides to abandon them. Allows the Park Service to charge companies fees to use national park land, and allowed Park Service law enforcement to better enforce safety standards. Now that we've discussed what the National Park Service 9B rules are, let's discuss how opening the national parks for oil drilling will result in degradation of the land. Degradation can be defined as the act of reducing the amount of strength or intensity of something. The process of creating oil drills and oil drilling is a daunting one. According to How Stuff Works, the crew clears and levels the land. They build access roads if necessary. They also drill a well if there's no natural water source nearby, because drilling does require water. To further prepare the area, they then dig a pit, which is used to dispose of rocks and drilling mud. The pit is lined with plastic, and if the site is ecologically sensitive, like in the wilderness or in marshland, for example, the rocks cutting and mud are trucked away and disposed of off-site. Despite the cleaning up process that the oil companies have to go through, the process of creating an oil well can leave long-term effects on the land being treated. With the oil drilling trucks weighing roughly 67,000 pounds, that is enough to compact the soil and cause irreversible damage. Now that we have touched base on the degradation of the land that will come from oil drilling, let us lastly discuss how oil drilling will also result in a loss of biodiversity in the national parks. As stated by the National Wildlife Federation, biodiversity is the diversity of ecosystems, natural communities, and habitats. Biodiversity is an essential factor in what makes Earth livable. It allows our ecosystems to adjust to the disturbances that happen around them. Oil wells and the equipment required to build them can permanently damage the ecosystems that thrive in national parks. In an article by Amy Mall, the National Resources Defense Council's senior policy analyst, states one of the most endangered mammals in North America lives in the area targeted for oil exploration, the iconic Florida panther. Less than 180 wild Florida panthers remain on Earth. If oil and gas companies destroy its habitat, the results could be catastrophic for their survival. The Florida panther is not the only animal that will be affected by the oil drilling that is happening in Big Cypress National Reserve. The Everglades snail kite and the wood stork are two of the other animals that will be negatively affected. Big Cypress National Park Reserve ranks resource management as their #2 priority in terms of spending. These oil wells will hinder the conservation efforts that are happening in that national park. Today we have defined what the National Park Service 9B rules are, explained how oil drilling will result in the degradation of the land, and lastly how oil drilling will result in a loss of biodiversity in the national parks. So in conclusion, opening the national parks for oil drilling will degrade the quality of the national parks. Thank you.
I like the list that you have as a detention device and the visualizations that you present at the beginning of the speech. I thought that that kind of sets up the idea that there's going to be some kind of degradation. What I thought was a little bit strange was that after that, it doesn't seem like those become the things that you're talking about. You're talking about things that are kind of very different from that. So that's a little bit awkward. The proposition is very clearly stated. That's a good thing. The contents are very nicely laid out, and you can kind of see how the sequencing is building together, especially the first point, which is not so much a claim, but it's background information that allows us to understand what's going on. I do have to say that I'm not sure if it's 90 or 9D, whichever the reference is that you've got going there. So that's just one of those awkward things that it sounds a little bit. I have no idea. I haven't looked at your outline.
Okay.
I'm just talking about, I've listened to your speech.
Yeah.
I'm going, so the National Park 90 rules, is that something that happened 20 years ago?
Sorry,
Or is 9B? Oh, see, I thought it was 9, and I thought maybe it was 9D.
Yeah.
You know, but I couldn't even tell that. Like I said, so that's probably just something that you could elaborate on a little bit more. When were the rules adopted? You do tell us a little bit about what they say, and one of the things that's kind of interesting, for instance, is because of the context, if the rules were relatively recent, then we should have a history of what things were like before the rules were put into place, and it should seem like there would be some other examples that you could use.
An added-on adaptation.
To put in the speech. It was a little confusing also. There's one point where you suggested that if we allow these things to happen, that it's not going to be their priority to address the other issues, conservation issues. Instead, they're going to be addressing these kinds of things. But it sounds like those rules are already in place. Don't they have to enforce those rules? That's, I think, a little bit confusing. I did like at the beginning that you do set up some information about why we have to talk about this, because the president is given an order to review those things, potentially change them, and make suggestions about it. And that's why this is an argument. That's why we're bothering to talk about that. So I thought you did a very good job on that. Like I said, I thought the internal structure was very clear. Some of the things, though, when you get to the issue of degradation, for instance, you describe what the process is like, but I don't know how significant it is, how much impact it has. The argument, for example, about biodiversity, which is actually your third point, has a couple of good examples, but they're very conditional kinds of statements. It says, if this had this effect that destroyed the panther, that would be a bad thing. What I'm looking for is the stuff that says it would have that particular effect. The description of the degradation that you described in the second point, would that have an effect on the environment of the panther so that it didn't breed, it ran away, it didn't have food to eat, whatever it is that would cause it to stop being around? I'm looking for a little bit of a connection there, and it feels like it's kind of conclusionary. It just assumes well, if you're building an oil well there, the panther's going to die. And I'm going, well, not unless he's drinking the oil. You know, what happens there? Yeah, the description that you give me is, on the second point, the most horrifying thing that happens is these giant trucks come in and they compact the land. And I'm going, okay, so how is that going to produce those particular problems down the road? There's probably an explanation of that, but it's just not very clear in the argument as it's being presented. I thought, like I said, you were very efficient in presenting the argument. You were clear in everything you said. It's crisp. We need, I think, a little bit more information on a couple of those points to kind of fill in the connections between the inferences that you're making. And it would be nice if, like I mentioned sufficiency before, I don't know, the acne thing is sufficient. I'm going, okay, well, how big an impact is the trucks going down this road compacting the ground going to be?
Right.
You know, does it destroy tourism? You're making the inference that it's going to have some impact on biodiversity. And I'm going, well, I need something that kind of connects those a little bit more to be convinced. All right, thank you.